Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. Episode number 172. Today we're going behind the scenes with Babel 7. We are your hosts this week, Leon, Justin, Eric, and Danny. Hello, gents. How's it going?
Hi.
Hello, Justin.
Hello.
It's a Tuesday, and I feel like the week is going to be long, but it looks so very promising.
Other than this hurricane, other than that.
Oh, see, now I just feel stupid for forgetting about the hurricane. So,
doesn't faze you on the West Coast.
No, the closest thing we get to hurricanes is too much sun. I don't know. Like we don't have the equivalent thing. Earthquakes, like once every decade or so. It's hard to say, but if you're on the East Coast, I hope you remain safe this week. That hurricane looks very, very large in terms of dot form. But we're not talking hurricanes this week. Today we're talking about the web. And before we get started and introduce our guest this week, let's throw it over to Leon, who's going to talk about This Week in the Web in 2 minutes or less. Leon.
Thanks, Justin. So first of all, the State of JavaScript 2018 survey is out. So it's asking for everybody's help to gather statistics on the JavaScript ecosystem. The data from previous years has been really invaluable, so please take the time to fill that in. GitHub has just published an article detailing the process they went through to remove jQuery as a dependency from their front end, and also how they chose to use browser APIs instead of relying on another library or framework. So that's an interesting read, so go and check that out. The JavaScript equality game is a simple game in the style of the old Minesweeper game on Windows, and that lets you basically test your knowledge of the JavaScript equals operator, which is kind of fun, so check that out. A new article has been published on the Google developers site, and that details all the recent changes in Chrome DevTools that came with Chrome 70. So lots of new features in there. Go and check that out. React 16.5 has just been released. It's got loads of improvements and fixes, so check out the release notes for all the information. And Microsoft has just announced a public preview of a new feature in VS Code. So this is quite a cool one. The feature is basically the ability to comment, review, and validate GitHub pull requests directly from VS Code. So yeah, check the blog post out for all the details on that one. And I just spotted a cool repository. So Web Components To Do is a repo on GitHub with a simple to-do list app, and it's written in various different web component technologies, so you can kind of compare and contrast the different approaches. So that's really good as well. And that's everything from me for This Week in Web. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Leon. I'm slightly sad that jQuery got removed off of GitHub's thing, just because I've got a soft spot for jQuery. But that's a very interesting article. I wrote it the other day, and it's an approach that if you're interested, you should take a look.
Yeah, I actually wrote a book on jQuery quite a while ago, so I feel sad too.
See, yeah, there you go. See, jQuery has done a lot for the web, still continues to in many people's stacks. So, every time I see it pop up, I think, a little nostalgia, a little bit of, I wonder what kind of jQuery I'll have to fix next week. But we're not talking about jQuery this week. Today, we're talking about Babel. So let's introduce our guest. Welcome back to the show, Henry. Henry, how you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I'm good. Just came back from vacation.
And what a better way to come back from vacation to come talk about behind the scenes with the wonderful version 7. So congrats on that.
Thanks. It's been a while.
So for those out there who don't know you, remind everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so right now I'm one of the maintainers on Babel. Left my job at Adobe, I think it's 6 months now, which is pretty crazy to think about. And yeah, right now I'm trying to work on open source and Babel full time. And I live in New York.
Congrats on living the dream.
Thank you. Still working on that, but yeah, I'm actually surprised I've made it so far.
Yeah, that's quite a transition when you've, worked at a large corp and now you're just working on, something. You've been working on Babel for a very long time, though. It should be mentioned at this point. You've been through the thick and thick of it with Babel.
Right. Yeah, I think I've been working on it for at least 2 or 3 years, longer than the original creator at this point. And most of the time I did it was in my free time. So yeah, this is a pretty big change, and not just like project wise, but like having to figure out all those things that you have to do with, you have to set up like how do you do your taxes and health insurance and still things I still have to figure out now. But yeah.
No one talks about that side of open source, right? Oh yeah, I have to like run pieces of my life that I never quite remembered, existed in terms of things. Not an easy thing to do.
Right. Like everyone's focused on, what bugs have to be fixed and stuff. It's like, well, you kind of have to like figure out your life situation, like where you're gonna live and all these other things that you would normally never have to think about. And it's not like you want to like bring that up in a conversation or anything, but you kind of have to deal with that.
It is a tough thing, though, I think, that most people forget about. And the open source community, depending on which sort of branch of that community you're in, can be difficult at times because people tend to forget that there are people on the other side of those tickets. But in
Yes.
terms, yeah, but in terms of babbly things, seven comes forth amongst the willows, and it's sort of been a long time coming. Tell us a little bit about Babel 7.
Yeah, so I guess to start, we I think I initially uh wanted to start working at least probably 2 years ago, and I think it's been 3 years since Babel 6 was released. Um, and I think initially it was just like, oh, we should like, drop old versions of Node because that's happening. Like this was Node like 0.10 and 0.12 at the time. And of course, what happens is you're like, oh, that's an opportunity or excuse, you could say, to add other breaking changes. So, and I don't think we had like a set deadline or plan on what we were going to do. So it kind of just like snowballed. And then eventually, you're like, oh, then we should add this and this. And then we're all volunteers. So then we can't commit to like a certain date. And then the longer you've been working on something, the more I feel like inertia there is to just keep making it quote unquote better or perfect when you can't really do that. And then at some point you're just like, wow, we're kind of like stuck where you're like, you want to fix all these things, but you don't have the time, but then you feel bad releasing something that isn't good enough. And after I guess that long, you kind of just like, we have to do it now, or else it's never going to happen.
And Babel's so huge as well. It's so fundamental to so many people's like development workflows. So there must have been quite a lot of pressure to, while you're trying to make such fundamental changes, etc. So that must have been difficult. And yeah, congratulations for getting it out for sure.
Yeah, that's true. I think there a lot of times when you make a major release, it might just be like, oh, what are the breaking changes for the core thing that you're doing? But since Babel is such a big part of our ecosystem, I mean, I'd like to care about like how are we affecting like, other projects or other integrations. We don't want to just make a release and just say like, here it is, and you got to figure it out. So spent a long time trying to figure out like, how do we upgrade people? So we made a tool called Babel Upgrade. And then it's like it's really hard to keep because there's so many changes, like it makes it harder to create that change log and then the upgrade guide, and then making sure that integrations are already updated by the time other people are trying to use them. And of course, there are complaints like all the time now that's like, oh, this thing wasn't updated. It's like, yeah, because those things have to update as well. And so it's weird because your issue tracker isn't just like your repos, but like everyone else's too. And that's like a huge burden that you might not have to care about, but I guess I do. And that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. Um, and yeah, I guess I'm happy that we finally did it because, yeah, it just kind of gets to you in a way that, yeah, you don't really want to think about at all.
I just wanted to ask roughly how many core contributors do you have on the project, given how large it is?
Um, yeah, so I guess at this point we probably have like 5 or 6 people that work on it in the not necessarily day to day, but like at least maybe they're available on Slack or something, or chatting through things or reviewing PRs um, throughout the week. I'm the only person that's working on it full time. Everyone else is doing it in their free time. And we don't really have anyone like specifically getting paid by a company either. Um, so yeah, it's very small amount of people. And even if it was
Yeah.
just me full time, obviously I can't do everything. And I'm trying, and then because of that, I'm trying to like kind of change my role to be more of like a facilitator or project manager, where I'm like trying to figure out what we need to do. And if I just spent my time implementing things, I don't think we would get anything done. So something I want to think about like after 7 is like, how do we not just get contributors like from the community, but like how do we get the companies that use Babel in day to day for relying on all their infrastructure to contribute back, not just like through money, but like actually having people like work on the project.
So how has it been with getting support and help? I mean, you talked a little bit about it just now, but like I know it's a lot of stress, but how can people help and reach out to assist you, because it is a big it's a big undertaking for one person, and you're the only one feeling all that pressure, it seems like.
Yeah. It's weird. I almost feel like it's at like there are multiple levels of support, and I think most people, when they think of supporting open source, they think of money, and obviously that will need to be there for a project with such a big a scope as Babel. But so that's kind of like an assumption that I make. Like that's kind of obvious that we need support in that way, because I have to like actually pay rent and all that stuff. So yeah, people, companies or people can support the project by donating to. I have a Patreon, and there's also an open collective that we have, and so those are both like crowdfunding ways of being able to donate money to the project. And in our case, you can also do a thing where it's like we have like a support contract type thing, where it's like if you're paying us, you know, then we can give you like an office hours type thing per month. And there's other opportunities where we could do like, maybe we'll help you upgrade to Babel 7 for you and all that stuff. But all those things are kind of like, are you trading like, you're like trading something to get something more, instead of people just donating because you can work on the project. Like if I make videos and then make money from that, then I'm making videos. I'm not working on the project. Although you could say that teaching people about it could be useful.
Yeah, there's value in all of that for sure.
Right. It's kind of just like, what do you want to do with your time? It's like, if I spend all my time trying to make money from open source, then I kind of want to spend more time working on the project itself versus like these side things which are related, but then that feels more like consulting. So that's just like what you're comfortable with, and maybe I should try out. Everyone should be trying out different avenues of that to get revenue. Yeah.
You had said earlier that that you started just doing this in your spare time, right? Your copious free time. But if people started coming up to you and said, "Hey, I have some hours, I need to I want to help the community. I want to go and Babel is such a great project. I use it in like all this code that I'm writing. Where do you think would be the best places for them to contribute? Like, should they do documentation? Should they help with certain features? Should they do organizational things? Like, what would be the best things people could help you with, so that you can focus on these other things that you need to?"
Yeah, I think an open source project kind of needs a little bit of everything, really, because everyone has to wear every hat. You have to do like writing blog posts, and you have to do social media. You have to answer issues on Slack and GitHub and Twitter. You don't have to do any of those things. It's just what people normally do. And yeah, documentation, the website, features, all those things are ways to get involved. I think it's just there's so many things to get involved in my point of view, but then from a new contributor point of view, they think that the project is like, I guess, stable or doesn't need help or they're not capable of doing it. And it's like on us to help them get inspired enough to first say that anyone that's using it should be able to get involved. And then also that, and you also don't have to listen to us on like what exactly needs to get done. It's like everyone should be able to have the freedom to think about like what can improve this project that I see that other people don't see. And it doesn't take away from other people's what they're doing. Of course, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, is true. Like if you did an issue, if I did an issue on there and said, hey, there's this problem, that's not as good as me saying, hey, I fixed this problem. Here's a PR for you. What's the worst that happens? Like you say no. So, I mean, I think that would be a good thing is people to be proactive with it.
Yeah. I guess the complicated part is that it is a little nuanced in the sense that like, oh yeah, you can just make a PR, but especially if it's their first PR and we say no, then they might get turned off by like, oh, they didn't accept my PR. And I think we need to do a better job in open source in general of like setting expectations. If you make a PR without there being an existing issue, it's possible, that they might reject it, or, they just don't have time. And this is just a problem of just having, there's 100 PRs and you're one of them, and maybe it's your first time and you feel bad that you weren't able to look at it, or it might not be good. But then they kind of expect, and there's almost a sense of entitlement, like my PR has to get merged. And people forget that, once you merge it, we're going to have to maintain this thing forever. And if you're not a maintainer, then you're just kind of like giving us a new like thing that we have to maintain. So it's like important to like be careful about that, but also don't be too stingy. So it's like very like loose, but also like it's just there's not like a certain formula to any of this, right? Because we're dealing with people. But yeah, I would just say that there's a lot more ways to get involved than we're currently thinking about in open source, where everything's about code. And I think, yeah, management and like, triage and organization, those are all valuable skills, maybe more valuable than code itself, that we're not really focusing on.
That's awesome. That's actually a lot. That's a lot of really good insight we talk about open source a good bit, and that's a lot of insight that a lot of people I don't think usually get because it's hard. It's a difficult thing to talk about, and not really difficult to talk about, but it can sometimes be hard to explain. So you already talked about a little bit having to make these big changes. Babel 7 has been a long time coming, which also means breaking changes for some people in the community. So my question is a little bit two-part. As one, I think we should talk about what some of those breaking changes are. We go into detail about, so you mentioned some tools for migrating and things like that, or even how did you decide, yes, this is a breaking change and this is why we decided it needed to happen, when you've already said it's because it is a big deal, you have to take that type of thing very seriously.
Yeah. So it's funny looking at it back because it's been so long, and in some sense I've been thinking about it for like 2 years, and I'm like, I guess we didn't really do anything. But then it's like, okay, it was a lot of stuff. Some of these things aren't like, it's like a feature. It's almost like I'm taking away something because I think it's better for everyone. And so like a really easy one is that we changed the namespace for Babel itself to a scope package. So instead of like Babel-core or Babel-CLI, you have to install like an @Babel/core or @Babel/something. And it's funny, I mean, this is its own thing, but we would have people I would like merge a PR for a new proposal, say like the pipeline operator, because everyone loves that. And I didn't release it yet. And so someone thought it'd be fun because they wanted to use it early to publish the package themselves. And then so when I was going to publish it, it already got published. I was like, wait, what? And so I found out someone else did it. And then I had to like ask them to give it back from the email and all this stuff. Or, we would try to publish a new preset, like preset 2018 and then 19, all that. And then someone already did it, of course. So those are like real examples of what happened. And I think that's why people are moving to scope packages, because you own the whole scope and no one can publish under that scope other than the admins for that. And so anytime we have a new package now, no one can do that and they have to do their own name. So that's like a really small thing, but it's also a really big thing because it also helps differentiate between like official Babel, quote, Babel packages versus like the community ones. Because someone can name something. I think we had an issue was like, oh, there's a bug in Babel, a preset env, but they actually installed Babel-env, which is not a preset. It's just some tool that they installed and it happened to have the same similar name. Or maybe it's a typo. And so I think moving to that really helped us. And it's just a name change, right? It's not even like a feature or anything. Another thing that was one of the biggest breaking changes that we had like a lot of back and forth on was removing the stage presets. So so I guess backing up a bit. So all the new JavaScript proposals and new syntax, they go through the staging process instead of going directly into the browsers. And so TC39 is Technical Committee 39. They're the group or committee of people that work on what's going to go into the language next. And there's like a staging process from stage 0 to stage 4 of increasing, I guess, stability. And once it gets to 4, that means it's going to be in the language. And so anything that's 0 to 3 might, it might get changed, it might get dropped, it might even go down a stage. But since I think the beginning of Babel, even Babel 5, we've had this idea of like a stage flag. And then in 6, I added the stage preset. All it does is it's like literally an array of plugins, and it turns on the plugins in that stage. And then when the stage updates, we would update that preset. So the problem with that is that, well, first of all, every time we have a meeting, which is every 2 months, maybe something gets updated, and then we have to update that stage preset. And even that itself is already annoying because you would have to keep updating that package potentially every 2 months. And that assumes that there's no changes in the syntax itself. What if there was a breaking change? Then now does the preset have to have a breaking change and the plugin itself have a breaking change? And it makes sense that it would be independently versioned. And then people like to copy paste, configs because they don't understand how it works. And so if you use like Babel preset stage 0, so in your config you might have like React and then like stage 0 or something, but no one has any idea what stage 0 is. It doesn't, in that name, it doesn't tell you what it is. So the only way to know is by looking it up. And so every time you use it, you have to figure out what's in it. And at that point, you're basically just looking up, and it's not really a convenience anymore. So I figured if we removed it, you would have to explicitly opt into what you want. Yeah, that's the summary of that. I wrote a whole blog post on why, because I knew that it would be controversial because everyone's complaining about like the whole JavaScript fatigue and that stuff like that.
I had a question about some of the new pieces in here. Like for instance, Babel config versus the Babel RC, because the config.js was added, and it looks a lot more declarative or imperative rather than declarative like the Babel RC is. Can you talk a little about the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so we added that for a pretty specific reason, and I probably should have put in the heading something different, but I did add a sentence that basically said it's not like a replacement. So because we don't really want people to like start using this instead of Babel RC if they don't need to. Like it's like once we allow you to have JS, then people can do literally whatever they want, right? And so a lot of the issue with like even say like a Webpack config or Gulp is like you can do anything. And so eventually it just allows you to kind of just add more and more stuff until you don't even know what it's doing anymore. And I find people, even with the Babel RC, which is just JSON, people would just, when they have an issue or a bug, they would just add things. Like instead of removing things, they add more plugins or add more words to see if it will work. So if we introduce JS, it's like, what are they going to do with that?
It's always the way, though.
Yeah, but I know that there are people that really want this idea of being able to dynamically do something with your Babel config because you need it, and so it's like, okay, we'll give you the option. I don't know how much we can promote it, and I know that it kind of opens the floodgates, but I think it was worth adding it anyway. But yeah, it's imperative because it's literally just JS, and a lot of the time you don't need to do it. So it's just like if you need some kind of logic, right, that you can't have in JSON, you can use it. And so that could be like using like even the environmental variables. You don't have to use JavaScript. You can just use our the thing that's built in. So another thing that we did was specifically for the Babel config.js file, we changed how the config resolution works, which is not something that people even think about at all. But like with other projects like ESLint or something like that, you can have multiple Babel RC files in every I guess folder. And so when Babel finds a file to compile, it tries to look up to find the first Babel RC that it finds, and it uses that config. So if you had a Babel RC in your test folder, then that could compile differently than your source folder, or your, I don't know, different, just maybe you want different configs for different files. But it's kind of I think it's kind of annoying to have all these Babel RCs everywhere in every folder. And so combining this Babel config.js with the second thing we added, which is called overrides, you can basically have one config that specifies the multiple configs for your whole project. So maybe you want to compile differently. If say you use Babel in server code and then you have Babel in your browser code, you probably want to compile differently. Then you can have one config that says oh, in this folder compile it like this, and this other folder compile it like that. And also it only resolves all files with that one file. So there's no lookup at all. It's just basically points directly to that config. And maybe for most projects that's not necessary at all, but
sounds super flexible, that's for sure. Would you kind of say that a good rule of thumb is you use the Babel RC until it doesn't do quite what you need, and then you can use the Babel config and some of these other configuration options? Does that sound about right?
Yep, I think so.
Cool. Nice. I'd really like to ask about JSX fragment support and HTML element support. I don't know whether you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the JSX fragment thing is I could talk about that. I mean, that's just a new syntax that React added so that you don't have to do bracket React.fragment, and you can just do less than and then greater than. So it's just a nice syntax. It's supported in other tools too. I could also say that that's a feature, right? So we didn't have to add it in 7. We could have added it in 6, but it's all right, and we don't have that much time or people, and kind of want people to use 7, so I kind of just left it in there. Although I think we added it a long time ago. So, and then so the HTML element thing. So it's funny because for that, I would call it a bug, I guess, or an issue. So with ES6 classes, you can extend classes. So class C extends D or something. But Babel had this issue where it couldn't extend native classes. And so the HTML element thing is more that you can do class C extends array or class C extends error, and it works correctly, where before it had some previous issues we couldn't deal with. And so this is important for some people because extending HTML element is for stuff like web components or Polymer and tools like that.
These both may seem like very minor things, right?
Yeah.
But I use this stuff every day. The JSX fragments we use a lot. On my own time, I use HTML element just like everybody else on this podcast. So it's it's pretty good for us.
I mentioned in the blog post, like there are a lot of people that really wanted these two things, and I think we would have like this caveat page where you couldn't do all that stuff, and now we finally fixed it. I don't think, yeah, because this has been like an issue for like 3 years, so yeah, it's a big deal.
So there was a little mention in your post about speed. So when you're talking about speed in Babel, what exactly are you talking about? Because that could mean a bunch of things. And how has it changed from 6 to 7?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So that it does mean multiple. It could mean multiple things, and it does. So there's the speed of running Babel like on your computer in development, like when you're building, like compiling. So that's actually faster. So what happened was, well, we made some changes ourselves, and then it was like benchmarks, and then you can check that, oh, I compiled this file and it's faster now. But also some of the people on the V8 team, Benedict and other people, they submitted some PRs to change some of the code so that, the parts that were slow like are a little bit faster. And they even made this whole benchmark called the Web Tooling Benchmark. Just has like all the other JS tools, and they just run all of those to see where they can send PRs or update V8 itself to be faster. So that's that. I mean, I don't think that it's going to significantly. Well, I don't know really if it's going to significantly change like build size, because it kind of depends on what you're running. But also like there's also the speed of the code that Babel outputs, which is really important. But people don't really think about that. So it's hard because there's also like when you run the code that Babel outputs, is that fast? And then how much code is Babel outputting? And is that like smaller or greater? And that it's a different topic, but going into that, it's really hard to think about that trade-off, because Babel is fundamentally a compiler that we're trying to be as spec compliant as possible, because not just because like, oh, we want to just for the sake of doing that, but like because you're like, oh, why do you care so much about being 100% right or doing things the correct way if it doesn't have to be? Is because, well, especially with preset env and the fact that we want people to eventually run native ES6 plus and not run with Babel if they don't have to, like if you support the newer browsers, then when you switch over and you were relying on like buggy behavior, then it's going to make it more painful when you aren't using Babel for that syntax. And so it's important for us to do that, at least like when you are switching over. But we have this like we've had this like option called loose mode for a long time, which is usually used by library authors because they I would assume you would have a better idea of what you're getting into, and then you can output less, and then there's less code size because you're not relying on all the behavior.
So one thing that I'm really curious about that was a big point made by Babel and also Microsoft is the I don't know if it's really partnership or what it is, but better integration with Babel and TypeScript. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that integration is, and then also how that came to be.
Yes, please.
Okay, so first of all, the integration itself. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between what it actually does, or even what's the difference between Babel and TypeScript. But our integration just does the same thing that we have with Flow. So Flow has a preset and it like removes the types. Flow itself is not a compiler. It just checks types and it gives you errors. And so it doesn't need to compile anything. And so it made sense that Babel would kind of remove those type annotations for you, and then Flow would give you errors. And so I realized that, well, obviously people are using TypeScript as well. and we could do the same thing, right? I don't see any reason not to do it, other than the fact that it's a lot of work. So I don't think I'm opposed to it from like a theoretical point of view. And so all it does is, yeah, it just finds like, like if you had the type annotation with TypeScript file, then it'll remove it and then it compiles the code itself with Babel. And so in that sense, you're just using TypeScript as a checker. So like say you are using VS Code and you use TypeScript and Babel, you would still get all those checks in your like editor, or you can run the TS check like manually, but I guess you wouldn't really need to. And then everything is run through Babel again. So it's just making Babel do all the output.
So to be clear, so the main difference between running, let's say that the TypeScript compiler on its own and then using TypeScript with Babel is which tool is outputting the code at the end. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, awesome.
Yeah. And so the purpose, like why you would want to do this, is either because the output from Babel is quote unquote like you just like that better, or because you are using Babel plugins, and like not just the ones that are syntax related, but like all the other ones from third party or community plugins, or tools that integrate with Babel easier. So
okay, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And so, and because the first that I had actually heard about it was I use TypeScript quite a bit, and I follow TypeScript very closely. And they actually the TypeScript team or at Microsoft or something wrote a blog post that was like, or just some kind of little blurb that was like, this is possible now, and this is something that you should look into. And I'm curious what the relationship is between the Babel team and the TypeScript team to get some I guess a promotion like that is the way I would put it, I guess.
yeah. So first, I would say that the TypeScript team has been really responsive and helpful in talking about through all these things. We have a few like video calls, and I got to meet with the team when I went to Seattle, I think of like a month or two ago, just to talk and stuff like that. I mean, it's a partnership in that we're working together. It's not like we're getting paid or anything. It's just we want to support the different communities that want to use both. I think it's a good idea. I know when we initially talked, I think they were the ones that brought it up, even though I was thinking about it before. But I guess my concern was that if we support this, we're not going to this would mean that we're not going to just support it once, obviously, because they're going to add new features. And then if it's not supported in both, then what was the point of doing this, right? It's like a long-term thing. And also because of that, and that we're all volunteers, I asked if they would do like bulk of the work, at least up front, and then we're going to have to ask the community to help out with future support or at least all that stuff. So they've been helpful in creating issues and PRs and trying to align the two projects so that we're all in sync. So that's been really good. It's just like, it's funny because in the end, like even if they do a lot of the work, you still have to review it. So it's like, it's still a lot of work on our end. But it's really, really cool to work with them on this. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, thank you. I've been on a project for with React and TypeScript, server-side rendering, and it's been hard to integrate both of these. Like the server side has specific needs, and the front end has specific needs. So I mean, it's pretty interesting. Like I was trying to figure out how that works, and the way you explained it was pretty cool. If I were to change my application to make it simpler or start a new one, would I just add something to the TS config, and like how does that work?
The integration. So what you could do is change the config, or change instead of running TSC to output code, you would just run like, I think there's like a check flag or something. I forgot exactly. And then you would just add the TypeScript preset to your Babel config. I think that the TypeScript blog has more information on how exactly to do it, but But
And that
essentially,
would just defer the transpiler to use Babel, right?
yeah, exactly.
You'll have to check out Microsoft's blog.
Yeah, that's
And
super
we can
cool.
also obviously make it easier because I'm sure there's things that don't need to be there that we could automatically do for you. So
That's
You
pretty
mentioned that one of the reasons you might want to do that is if you have got a Babel plugin or something which is doing something which obviously you wouldn't be able to use with the TypeScript compiler. Talking of plugins, one of the new things in Babel 7 is macros. Are they similar to plugins? Kind of how do they? Yeah, what's the difference?
yeah, that's a good question. So first, I would say that it's not necessarily like tied to Babel 7. I just figured that so Babel Macros is like a project that Kenzie Dodds actually made, and so and it's not like he's on the core team, but he's definitely like a great community member and knows a lot about Babel. And I figured that I already got him to write a blog post about it earlier, but I figured no one really saw it, and so I knew that everyone's going to see Babel 7, so might as well talk about something that he's done because a lot of people are using it and talking about it. And so I thought we could promote that in the blog. So Babel macros are Babel plugins. It's weird that it is called macro. It's not really like the macro in the programming language sense because that's like a whole different thing. But it's still a plugin that transforms code. And I would just say that instead of transforming syntax, like arrow functions to regular functions, it can what's good. It's weird because it's his way of doing like a configless plugin. So all these other plugins, like you could have a plugin that removes console.log or something, or maybe replaces an import with something else. And so instead of having to add that to your config, you can just like import the macro. It's weird because it's really hard to explain. But essentially it's a code transform that's not syntax like related.
Cool. I can see a lot of uses for a few of those examples you gave there. Ace, is there where would be a good place to go to actually read more about that? Something we can put in the show notes for people to take a look at.
Yeah. I think the repo itself and then the original blog post that Kent made is a good resource.
Cool. We'll make sure we stick that in the show notes then. Ace, thanks.
Yeah, like just one example that he had was if you don't want to like hard code certain data into your code, and so what you could do is like require some like basically you can eval code, like and then it will like inline it when it's compiled so that you're not committing that to your Git repo. So like say you want to like get a bunch of images and then render them. You don't want to like hard code all that in there. So then you could write this code that does that. And then when Babel compiles it, it'll compile it into that for you on the output side.
That does sound quite useful, especially with testing things and stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the innovative and exciting projects that you've heard or seen about using Babel 7?
I don't know what I would say about innovative because I guess it's just like if everyone's using it, then I don't really know exactly like specifically like it's almost like no one really tells me anymore like they're using Babel. It's like it's not I don't know it's not that cool anymore to say that you're using Babel because I guess they're using it already. But I would
You've
say
become
that
browserify? What happened?
I don't know. I don't hear about it. They're just like, oh yeah. It's funny. The beta was used by like a bunch of projects. Like we were telling people it's a beta, so you don't have to use it, and there's probably going to be breaking changes. But of course, all these tools started using it. So like there's like Next.js and Vue CLI, React Native, and all those are using the Babel 7 before it was released. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities, especially if you use something like web workers or service worker. You can do an entire build in the browser, more or less.
Yeah, exactly.
So the reasons to use Babel are pretty obvious, I think, from what you've said. I mean, it powers a lot of our build steps. Even though I use TypeScript on my project mostly, I do have a separate step for Babel for specific things. Is there a reason that maybe you wouldn't use Babel for some cases? Maybe something that's has less build complexity, or is there any reason not to use it?
Yeah. Well, I guess first I would say that even if you aren't using Babel, it's like very likely all your dependencies are. So like even React is using Babel, and all these frameworks and all these libraries. So that's just talking about the ubiquity of it. And even if you aren't personally using it yourself, we're the only project that's like implementing like proposals before they are, stage 3 or stage 4. And so I think even from that point of view, I think it's important for people to support what we're doing, just so that we can help influence the language in a way that better supports the community. And I think so the reason why you wouldn't use Babel, is like, say, you don't want to add another step to your build process. And we can always work to make that easier, but ultimately it's going to be inherently, there's things that you have to configure or do. Or if you care a lot about like the output, in that case, then you should just write ES5, because you probably shouldn't use a build step because you're really concerned about what the output is. But you could always ask questions or make issues or like, oh, why is this thing so the output like this? And then maybe we could change that. So
Such a hard thing. Like I think it really sort of depends on what you're doing. Like the ES5 argument, obviously, it's still being sort of made. I struggle with it though. Like I really struggle with it from a this adds value standpoint for some projects, because you're saying, well, why do you need that ES15 or ES5 target as a start point? Like why? Well, I gotta have IE something. And you're like, okay, well that's sad, but do you really need that? Like again, like I think there's something to be said that I can compile to ES5. It's another thing to say that it should be as performant as my ES6. Like I think that's.
Sounds like you've been listening in on my stand-ups in the morning.
I struggle. I've had this question a lot lately from folks from various teams about we need to ship this, and I question the need. I immediately say, show me the data that proves that need exists. Where, well, okay, it has to be this, or it has to be equal. Like the notion that these things are equal through a compile step, like they will perform the same. Well, perform the same may be the same output of a thing, but saying that they will be the same amount of performance, I don't know. Like to me, that I feel like that there are more important things to do, which is why to me, Babel is still very important across the board. Where I do need to transform things, but at the same time, do I want to spend all that time in ES5? Like I don't know.
In Babel 8, it'll just transpile to some binary code. So
WebAssembly, baby. Yeah, we're just gonna we're all going Rust now. That's what I've heard.
No, it's a good point. Another thing that people have been talking about a lot lately is the fact that we added preset envs so that you can target multiple browsers. Then the next question is why can't we send different bundles to different browsers? And so a lot of people have been thinking about how do you send like the ES5 only thing to IE, and then the ES6 plus stuff to all the other browsers that are evergreen, that do support native stuff. And in that case, you kind of have the best of both worlds, assuming you do that correctly.
Yeah, I think that's. I've written some of that over the last year for various people in terms of like how you do that, and like the problem is that it really depends on how much of your infrastructure you control.
Right.
Like if you control the server side, then differential serving I think becomes somewhat simpler. I mean, we have some tooling around that. Like the Polymer folks had written some of that, I think. But at the same time, what if you don't control that? Well, how do you do that on the client side and make that performant? And that is frankly hard. Like I I've been successful with it with a uprising inflection in my voice. But yeah, you bring up a very valid point, which is if you're differential serving out of that state, then we're pretty close. But how do you? Yeah, that last mile is brutal to make it all hum very efficiently.
Yeah.
So close.
So, hearing all of the amazing stuff that's gone into Babel 7, there's obviously lots of great new features in there. The TypeScript integration is really cool, particularly excited about the HTML element support and all the other things. So we are running up against time. So I've just got one question, which is when's Babel 8 going to be released? No, I'm just kidding. So looking forward,
7 years from now,
we're gonna double the time. Yeah. Or never,
what are some of the features or some of the interesting things you're looking forward to working on in the future, however far away that might be?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of things I'm interested in are more meta related. So where we landed the new decorators support, like stage 2 decorators, which is that also took like whatever 2-3 years. And I could probably do a whole podcast on that, like the fact that no one wanted to work on it, and then we had to ask like random people to do it. They're like interns. Like just like why, if people really wanted this to happen, then why didn't we do it earlier? And then we had some help from different companies to implement private. I think it was private fields. A bunch of different new syntaxes coming up. So things that we didn't land yet that are stage 3. So there's a bunch of proposals coming up that are landing soon. But like I think I'm excited to see like how are we gonna like move forward in making that faster. So like, there's a new proposal and who's gonna do the work. And if a company really wants it, then maybe they should like ask their like one of their employees to like implement it. And then we can move forward in that stage or something like that. So yeah, I'm excited to figure out how to work with companies to get them to be involved, not just asking for help, but actually providing the help.
Yeah, I think it's great that you have the docs for your roadmap on there, the article that you put out recently. That also has a list of those features that you were talking about. So we should check that out. Maybe put that in the show notes. Yeah, it's one of the things I'm looking forward to. Just real quick, plugin ordering before and after. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. I think I made a PR for that a year ago as well. It's just like that is like a really hard problem, but I guess hopefully this before after thing works. Yeah.
All right.
Well, looks like we're about against time. Henry, thank you so much for coming on the show. We always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Leon, Eric, Danny, closing thoughts as we wrap.
Keep on babbling.
Keep on babbling.
Just to thank Henry for taking the time to come and talk to us about a project which is so fundamental in so many people's development lives. So thank you for all the hard work, and to the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, thank you. No pressure, but thank you.
That's true. I definitely couldn't have done that without other people. There's no way I would want to do this by myself. Yeah.
No, it's too much.
Well, with that, this has been episode number 172 of the Web Platform Podcast. Today we've talked with Henry about what's going on with Babel 7, what it's like in working open source, and all the wonderful things that is web. Tune in next week when we talk more things web, more things platform, and have a great rest of your week.